welcome to today's Marketing Legos Thought Leader interview. My name is Harshit and I'm the Director of Business Alliances of two brilliant marketing SaaS tools, RankWatch and Websignals. And my today's special guest is co-founder of an amazing Bangalore-based company called White Rabbit Content, dedicated to creating innovative e-learning solutions. Varun, a big welcome and so happy to host you today.
Thanks, Harshit. Happy to be here. Thanks for reaching out and getting this organized. I am looking forward to this exchange and having some ideas put on the table and going through this with you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Varun. Let's talk about your journey first. How are you like as a kid and how you got to where you are today?
That's a very interesting question. Not very many meetings and interviews and discussions like this start with that. So my name is Varun Olimattel, and I come from a small town called Jamshedpur. So actually, from an SEO point of view, this may be a nice plug because tomorrow is the founder's birthday. JRD Tata Nagar is what Jamshedpur is colloquially known as.
Yeah. And they celebrated very well in Tata Nagar. I think Jubilee Park, they have phenomenal decorations and they celebrate.
Absolutely. I mean, the city transforms itself almost overnight. The guys from the headquarters, send teams down to the town to sort of, paint murals and just touch things up. Lots of fireworks, lots of decorations, lots of lovely things are installed for 3rd March. Some of the schools also get involved in celebrating this event. So they do like a drill or a fire show. I mean, I remember when I was in school, we had a fire drill, and we had sort of when we went to a stadium in the city where the whole sort of field, the football field was used to sort of showcase the drill, and it's a pretty big deal, and the city looks really pretty. So yeah, that's happening tomorrow, so I went to school there, and as a kid, I think I was a bit of a nerd. I was sort of obsessed with mathematics. So most of my time was spent, cracking that difficult calculus problem or trigonometry problem. And in math, it doesn't matter, right? You can take several approaches and still arrive at the right answer. Yeah. You could do it in half a page. You could take several pages, but I think I enjoyed the process more than just getting to the answer. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I was a bit of a nerd, but I also dabbled in a lot of extracurricular activities, and I would like to thank my parents for that, because both my parents are teachers. I say are because teaching is a profession you don't really retire from. So they are still active and they're still healthy. So I was involved in public speaking, in sports, even represented my school and my state in a couple of those things. I guess I was the typical guy, when in class, crack math problems, outside of class, do naughty things, play as many sports as possible. So, but then the school I went to, which was Loyola School, is a Jesuit-run institution. And one of the things they do is, and it sort of trickles down from the top right down to the bottom at the classroom level, is they sort of allow the students to expand horizons. And it's not just, chase the marks. And back in the day, I think you'll be familiar with this concept of 6 points, right? Yeah. In your boards, if you got 90 plus in your subjects, and if you had like a 5 points or a 6 points, then you were considered, God. or, that's a badge you took throughout your academic journey. I think the word that we used to use on campus was top. Wo top hai math mein, or something, in that ilk. But I think the school gave us everything we needed to sort of really dabble into any interest. If you wanted to know more about journalism, and that sort of tickled you at a young age, we had a press club that would, at that level, get you introduced to conducting interviews, asking questions, asking the right type of questions, organizing a team, people management, and putting all that together into the editorial, into the publication, and then releasing it to. So another thing that we had, something great that our school offered was every professor, every teacher, every member of the faculty was a moderator of a club. And that faculty member was typically the head of the department. So the history teacher was moderator and head of the history club. So they would do a bunch of things. They would meet on weekends, talk about historical events, do discussions, conduct quizzes. And you had similar things for all other faculties. So the geography faculty ran the geography club. You had the computer science teacher run the computer club, and so on and so forth. So really, I mean, after I finished school, just want to finish up with this segment. I think, everyone who graduated from Loyola, including me, was able to sort of really figure out, the vast dashboard of things that interested them, not just academically, but also in the extracurricular.
It's a very reputed school. My mother is from Tajanagar.
Okay.
And my aunt actually, went to the same school as yours. So.
Wow. Yeah. Whoever went there, whoever finished there, had very good things to say about it. Really opened the mind up, and some very good, long-lasting relationships with the teachers. So I finished school there, and then, like I said, I was in love with math. So I unfortunately in Jamshedpur, once you finish school, you have to look outside the state for opportunities, such as the case over there. So I landed up in St. Xavier's, Bombay. I graduated there. I did my math majors from there, and soon after, this was back in 2002. So I graduated St. Xavier's with my math majors in 2002. Mm-hmm. And somehow I belonged to, towards the end of senior college or third year college, as they call it, your bachelor's, right? You see a very distinct grouping. And what I'm referring to is essentially the guys who have B school on their mind. So there's a very large group of people towards the end of third year who know, yes, I want to go to B school. There's absolute clarity. So they go through the grind of, the CAT and the ZAT and all the entrance exams. Yep. And that's a very big group, almost 80%. Yep. And that breakup, was sort of also to be found in my batch. You had a relatively smaller group, about 10%, who sort of, some of us, I mean, you don't really know what you want to do, but because the majority is leading the pack, you sort of say, okay, I will also do it. So the 10%, ended up going in for that as well. And then there's this small group, very small group. I would say the earlier group is actually more like 15%. Mm-hmm. I think this group is more like 5% or even lesser, where you don't want to do B school right away. And you also know that you don't want to follow the crowd. Mm-hmm. I belonged, and I was not alone. I belonged to a group of people who fell in that third bucket. Oh. I have older siblings who went to B school, finished their master. So maybe I had some learnings from that in terms of get clarity first on where your strengths and weaknesses truly lie and what you really want to do. Maybe it came in from there. Also, a lot of conversations I was having with my batchmates.
Okay.
But I belong to that third group. And as a result, I found myself actually wanting some real live experience, in the workspace. I didn't have to wait too long. Fortunately, an opportunity came by, and it happened to be in the financial services space. And I grabbed it, and it was, sort of an extension of numbers and this, the world of numbers that I loved. So I said, okay, let's go see what it has to offer, and whether or not I can do well here. At that time, you're not really looking for the big fat paycheck, and monetary payoff is the last thing on your mind. Obviously, you need something to pay your bills, but I think at that time, all of us want to just fill our cup with knowledge and learn. And if that's something that you can, keep going till, I would say, you breathe your last, that's a fabulous life lit. But I went to work with one of the leading financial institutions in the country today. And I was part of their sales and relationship marketing team. So, I started my career there. I started my career in sales, in a manner of speaking. So right from, the cold calls and cold emails when it was the fad, to more sort of refined, more subtle, less intrusive rather, ways of reaching out. So I was in financial services for about 12 years after that, 13 years after that. And I moved around from where I started off, which was in equities and portfolio management and mutual fund selling, to other markets like commodities and Forex. And then I also hopped on across the banking side, where I was part of a company that was started by Merrill Lynch, DSP Merrill Lynch, in partnership with India Infoline, where it was in the consumer lending space. Okay. And funnily, this was 2007, very early 2007, 1 year before the subprime crisis hit the world as such. But the point I want to make here is, whatever is happening predominantly in the fintech space today, which is essentially consumer lending, retail lending and loan disbursal, is something that I was actually involved with in 2007. I mean, it's an idea before its time, but I think even the tech has evolved, compared to what was available at that time. So I think today is where it is primed to see more growth, and it already has, in a manner of speaking. And that actually was my first startup. I was the first employee there and part of the core team. We did set up a decent structure. We had great processes, but again, bad timing, I guess, in hindsight. No one saw it coming. After that, I sort of took a break for a bit to pursue my higher studies. So that's actually when I went to business school. This was 2010. So I worked from 2002 till about 2010. And then I had sort of developed my faculties and my strengths and my personality as such. So, I just want to link it back to what I said earlier. I went to the Asian Institute of Management in the Philippines. I was there till December of the following year, 2011. And during that time and a little while after, I sort of took a step back and sort of wanted to see, because I was out of the market.
Yeah.
despite being a program meant for working professionals, like, the 1-year program that ISB has, where you want to get back out there as quickly as possible.
Yep.
I sort of felt that there was a change happening in the industry, and everything was moving to the online space. So digital was the trend, the new trend. So I found myself actually in a bit of a spot, because I had very traditional skills in the offline space and the old way of doing things. And that's essentially what I came out of B school with, but armed with a new sort of perspective on things, as it were. I remember at the very beginning of digital, the stuff people were doing, the early movers, were actually Facebook ads, and just managing a Facebook account or a Facebook page, or setting up a website, and doing some very basic stuff in the AdWords space. I mean, compared to what it is now, it's I mean, it had very humble beginnings, and like you rightly said, there was nothing dedicated, not even like an elective or some expert to come in from the outside to give you a talk on it. So that's something that there were a lot of conferences that were being organized in the industry. I remember I attended a few by CMS Asia, and that was great. Actually, that brought the folks together under one roof in a room. The early movers, guys who wanted to be part of it, guys who were already part of it in some small way, to have conversations about what's happening and what should we expect, and other conversations. So like with any new trend, it's the initial set of discussions that are actually worth attending. The rest of it then becomes more repetitive, and the incremental benefit is minuscule. So I think most of the learnings actually came from that, and conversations with people who are in the space. And again, how you network and how you reach out to someone also has matured, right? Now you take LinkedIn, for example. Today, you can, or I can, reach out to somebody without knowing them, with a small introduction. But back in the day, 10 years ago, how would you do that, right? You would have to have these connections offline, and then via get somebody's email, and then cold email that person, because you couldn't cold call that person, because they would get upset and it would be intrusive. So yeah, I mean, a lot has happened in the space, and that's when I decided to actually, I was sort of convinced that digital is the space to be, because everybody is moving there. It's an industry-wide, organization-wide movement, as it were. I had some conversations with some folks who are doing some very interesting stuff in the training space on the digital side. I conducted my own sort of analysis on who's doing what and pricing and all of that. And I finally decided, okay, let's take the plunge. So I actually took the plunge into digital in 2013, 2014. I was part of a small boutique agency based out of Bombay. And we were doing digital media, digital marketing. And again, in 2014, you had very little, again, to sort of get busy with and execute. And what I mean by that is, essentially, on the supply side, you had a lot of stuff to do. But on the demand side, I mean, when you talk to clients and have conversations with them, the offtake was very, very slow. I found that conversations around just having an online presence, and keeping that live and keeping that constant was a difficult conversation to have in 2014. So even if we were talking to somebody about starting their own property, not just saying, okay, hey, we are so and so, we do this, not just doing that, but actually doing something more, which is community building, solving problems, starting conversations. It was a very, very long cycle. Yeah. We had some successes, and again, some of the larger successes involved doing some very basic stuff for companies who had seen the light and who had turned the corner with the decision on digital. But then again, we weren't doing broad-based stuff for them. We were doing very basic stuff, and then it was more about managing resources, and which is again a very important aspect of running an agency and a company, managing people. So resources could be people, could be budgets, operations, quality, etc., right? So I was involved with that, and then of course I found myself in Bangalore 2 years later, where I was part of a consumer electronics company based out of China. They had a setup here in Bangalore, and I sort of went in there and headed up their social media strategy as part of their larger digital Marcom operations. And soon after that, I think I was part of a 2-decade-old agency known very well for their public relations practice, but they had a fledgling digital media and social media operations. And then again, this was 2018, 2017, 2018, 4 years after I had taken the plunge into digital. And now is when more clients were saying, okay, I want to be online. Yeah. So I went in there to head up their digital and social media practice. It was a short stint, but a relatively successful stint, because there was a lot of demand and there was a lot of interest. So we had a pretty good team to execute on these strategies. And our clients were sort of varied. We had guys from the education space, we had guys from the outsourcing space. So that was a good stretch of time along the journey to sort of be part of a team set up, build up, and scale the business. And then what happened was I was sort of also toying with the idea of going back to doing something on my own, because before B School I was part of my first startup that was back in 2007, and now we were in 2018. This was a time when I was, I also got married, and my wife is a very important, sort of has important skills in the e-learning space. She is an instructional designer. So we were having conversations about what we could do possibly. And, both my parents, I mentioned earlier, were teachers. So from a pedigree point of view, I felt, okay, education and e-learning is an interesting space to be in. So we decided to take the plunge and start White Rabbit Content. That happened in January of 2019. Just quickly, if I could just touch upon why White Rabbit. I think both of us were sort of taken by the story in Alice in Wonderland, and of course that is the source of the name. Basically, there's this plot in the movie where Alice thinks she's hallucinating, and is she seeing the rabbit? Is she not seeing the rabbit? But then she finally sort of gives in to her gut, and then what she discovers is a world of humor and these creative creatures and magic, and so that's essentially what our ethos is, where we want to create something magical. We want to create something great for our customers. We are creatively inclined. We love connecting with people. We making relatable, creating relatable content, making it more human, and that's essentially the ethos and what we wanted to bring into our culture. And so we launched the company, and the first year we sort of went broad. We did a combination of purely digital media offerings as well as e-learning. But then towards the end of the first year, we realized that the e-learning business is showing signs of success relative to the digital media, digital marketing vertical. And come 2020, which is when the pandemic hit, we were anyway sort of taking a decision in Q4 of 2019, FY20, to sort of pivot on e-learning, and dig deeper in that space. And actually 2020 was a blessing in disguise for us, because of the sudden nature of the pandemic, there was this mass demand for moving learning content from existing platforms to platforms that could manage a large traffic, as well as move offline content online as quickly as possible. So 2020 was a good year for us, actually a great year for us. We doubled our revenues year on year, and we also were able to grow the team. So that was great. We also had some interesting conversations with folks in the e-learning space, and we're hoping that can continue. And of course, over the last 6 months or so, we have been involved with developing education products, because all this while, and we'll come to this, I guess, in your following questions, we were in the services space, but we wanted to be in the product space as well. So the last half a year or so has been dedicated to setting up and developing educational products. So we entered the B2C space and sort of run that as well.
Perfect. That's perfect. What is the typical client journey in your company? How exactly that those first 30 days, to be precise, looks like, and what processes do you have in place?
Right. I would say, before I talk about the first 30 days, let me actually say that the pandemic has also sort of refreshed every way we do business, right?
Yep.
Initially, we would, let's say, if you look at the contract tenure, for instance, even something as basic as that, if you're running an agency, you will prefer to get into, let's say, retainers, annual retainers, because there are a world of benefits, right? There's visibility of earnings. You can grow your team without, let's say, taking on a lot of risk. Also, hiring people is a challenge. Hiring good people is a challenge, and you don't want to be, churning out mediocre quality stuff to clients, because reputation is at stake. Now, finding those people who can really do great work is not easy, and they don't come cheap. And why should they come cheap, right? If you're great at your work, why should you undersell yourself, or why should the company discount that? Now, why I'm mentioning all of this is the pandemic sort of reset all of this. So while pre-pandemic, we were signing retainers for a year, even 2 years, the contract tenure now came down to a quarter. So, we were literally running retainers that were as long as, let's say, a project. And then every quarter, we would have conversations on whether you want to extend, et cetera, et cetera. So those were some, underlying challenges that we were
Even the
able
demand
to.
also increased, right? So the new business that was coming in also, must be helping you with the cash flows and.
Oh yes, so it was important to have your BD engine running, at almost at its best, because this was also a time when folks took their time to evaluate budgets and deployment. And some of the companies, some of the organizations, let's say a large number of organizations dealt with it differently. I'm digressing here, but typically, some of them ended up selling a lot of office space, freeing up cash flows from there. Again, work from home was brought in to free up some cash flows. But yeah, the BD engine had to be running almost at breakneck speed to ensure that, given the risk that came from reduction in retainer tenures, you could still sort of sustain. But coming back to your question, I wanted to just put that in perspective so that there's some context here. So the first 30 days typically would involve investigation, right? At the very beginning. Because when we would start conversations with clients, they would be in a separate position or a separate point in their chain of activities. So it was very important to decipher as to where they were and what they needed help with. Some were sitting, at the very start of the journey where they had a load of raw data, but they didn't know what to do with it. Some guys had some raw data and some finished data. They had the tech teams for it, and these were guys slightly higher up the chain, but they didn't know, or they sort of needed help with analyzing the raw data and sort of formatting it and presenting it and packaging it in a format that the end user could consume in a way that you saw some of the metrics also come through, which is engagement, learning, and all of that. So the first step always involved investigation and interacting with the folks who were, the owners of that point. And then, of course, once we figured out what the problem was, we would ideally do a gap analysis and understand, okay, this is where you are, this is where you need to be, or this is where you would like to be. So let's figure out what are the things that we need to deploy to sort of bridge those gaps. Is it a system that we need to build out for you? Is it a ready-made, off-the-market thing that we need to purchase? Is it a person that or a team that we need to train? If you have an in-house team of writers, then should we train them in instructional design or how to assimilate the information? So that would happen next. And then, of course, we would figure out what the problem statement or what the objectives are, or what we call learning objectives in the industry, right? So let's say you create a program. What is the objective of this program, right? At the end of this program, the learner or the end user should be able to do XYZ things, or they should be able to comfortably, let's say, liaise with a client, or if it's, and depending on the industry you're in, the objectives would vary. And then, of course, this is where, the next space is where we would say, okay, these are a few things you can do. But one thing that would be part of this phase, this step, is understanding what the client's budgets are. Because honestly speaking, that drives everything, right? Because in the e-learning space, you can make something as dry as, a code of conduct booklet, which is very dry content. It's just pages page after page of just text, right?
Yep.
Into a very interesting learning module, which is a project that we did, in fact, with animations and gamification and all of that. But that is on the higher side of the pricing spectrum. It does cost much higher much more than, let's say, if you were just, creating a static, file like an animated PPT, for instance. So that would be on the lower end of the pricing spectrum. So depending on the client's budget, we would say, hey, this is what you can do, but this is also what you can do with a higher budget. So we need to understand where your comfort level lies. And those were discussions that took the longest, because we met clients who genuinely didn't have the budget, in which case we just sort of helped them out with the best value that we could give them within their constraints. Some clients were apprehensive about, exhausting larger budgets, but then the value is that that you have a demo run, which we used to do to give them a sense of what the actual product will look like, should they sort of loosen their purse strings a little more. And once they were impressed with that, once all the stakeholders had some sort of a buy-in, then we would sort of roll out the project, and then it would be smooth sailing after that.
And the nature of project, I'm curious, like, is it more or less like a one-time thing, or, the clients were actually like in a recurring cycle?
Right. So let's say when you're with an agency and, a client comes along and says, hey, I want social media or ads or paid media. Now that's something you can say, okay, let's look at it from a year. Let's have a horizon of a year. In the e-learning industry, it takes on a slightly different form. In the e-learning space, depending on the client's requirement and the volume of work, it could be a project which would last 45 days, or it could be something that could keep you busy for, let's say, a year or even more. Now, it all depends on the quantum of work, the volume of work, and the stuff that the scope of work entails. And where we sort of positioned ourselves was in the content arena. We said we are specialists in the e-learning space because we understand how to assimilate raw content, cull the usable content from there, and build an engaging platform with that culled content to really give out to your end user. And the rest of the content you can feed to them as, let's say, good to know, or something that you can give them in another form, either a PDF, downloadable, or whatever. Now, we had a combination of things. So we had clients who we would work with just to sort of recreate the content and hand over the stuff to them. And those were relatively shorter engagements, because let's say they would have a tech team or an animation team that would bring the content to life, and then we would sort of initially handhold them and work with their teams to ensure all the QC is intact. But they would deploy it at their end. And moving to other types of engagements where clients needed help from start to finish. So it was a turnkey thing where we did not only content creation, but also building panels, animating, building out the design. If there were characters involved, then running that, slew of activities. And then, of course, deploying it on a platform, on a tech platform, to actually breathe life into, to the end user, or sort of building out that software. So those projects sort of took us longer. And like I said, in 2020, we had projects, large volume projects. I say projects because, they were one client or two client base, but huge volume of work to do in the scope, which actually, kept us busy throughout the year. Those projects are challenging to come by, but if you have conversations with, let's say, specific folks in the B2B space, which are your educational institutions, even the government has certain projects that involve building training programs for their for folks in the government, bureaucrats, etc., etc. Yeah. Those tend to be very high in volume, so those will keep you busy for longer periods of time. So we had a combination of both. Of short projects, which would be, let's say, 45 days to a quarter long, as well as work that we would be doing for a client for over a year and a half or so.
Gotcha. And since Varun, you're involved with HubSpot, you understand inbound and practice it, right? So let's talk a bit more about the core USP of the company, content generation. How do you go about planning and executing, content for your clients? What that process looks like, and keeping that SEO angle in mind. How do you go about that?
Right. One quick comment here, Harshit, I would like to do is see the content that we create for our clients. Is not your typical, let's say, stuff that you would do, let's say, for a client who wants to create a digital presence, yeah, and maintain that digital presence. Now, our clients are organizations, educational companies, edtech companies in the B2B space who are creating products for their end consumers. Now, their end consumer could be, again, an organization, yeah, or someone like you and me who, let's say, goes to a HubSpot and does something from their HubSpot Academy, yeah, or we go to a Udemy and buy a course over there and quickly upskill. Now, that content vastly differs from the content that you would do, let's say, as part of a scope as a digital media agency, right? The content there is essentially called learning content. So when we work with clients for on the content side, we are looking at a variety of types and formats. We are looking at technical content or non-technical content, hard skill, soft skill, etc., etc. Now, for instance, if you're teaching somebody how to play squash, and it, the shot is a forehand. Yeah. Now, that content is going to be vastly different to when you're, let's say, writing a blog for somebody saying, hey, these are the top 5 or a top 10 mobile apps to manage your finances, right? So the SEO element is a lot more, let's say, intertwined strongly with that listicle bucket than it is with dealing with this technical form of content. That being said, and of course you can extrapolate. If you take this to the manufacturing space, you can take this to the banking and financial sector, you can take this to the automation sector. So it will take on a completely different shape, size, form in terms of SEO. But that being said, there are, of course, very specific things that are common to what you would do for both. So, for instance, there are certain terminology that you have to use, which are well known. That is how it is accepted in the industry, in those circles. So you have to use that when you're building out these programs. And it's a bit of a tricky situation because at the end of the day, if your learner, see, ultimately, it's like a classroom, right? In school, the teacher has to cater to the lowest common denominator, right? There is probably going to be somebody in that class who is very, very sharp and is in the medium segment and is, let's say, taking his or her time to understand the concept. That's absolutely fine. But the true test is whether that third guy or that third student gets your concept. And therefore, simplifying it is something that is really, the challenge there. But in terms of deploying some of the content that we used for our own marketing, we sort of straddled between both, because we had to use certain terminology that is, of course, used in the industry, but also qualify for certain terms that drive search. So some of the stuff that we would do is, of course, we would like to keep things. We like to keep things simple, and then sort of build on that as we went along. So it all started. I mean, we did a combination of things. For instance, building out, keywords, so short tail, long tail keywords, looking at what the competition is, what our competitors are ranking for, and being able to sort of dovetail that and incorporate some of those learnings and findings into our content creation strategies. We were able to sort of put out some of the content in a variety of buckets. So we did evergreen content, which is something that you can just repurpose every year. We did some original content. We did stuff that we felt, based on our conversations with industry and folks from our space, were real problems. So we did some mailers, some mailer activities based on that, and that actually sort of led to some business soon after that campaign was run. So a variety of things sort of to help us drive it via the SEO parameter.
Gotcha. And what are the main KPIs that you keep track of? I would like to know, like, in both the spaces, like when you're working for an e-learning, that point of view, and as well as when you do it for your agency as
well. Right. So one important aspect for judging whether something has worked or not, for some of the stuff that we do for our clients, is now it falls in the qualitative as well as the quantitative. Now, on the quantitative side, you can do a bunch of things, and some of the stuff that we did was build in assessments and quizzes and tests, where we were able to build, where budgets allowed us to build more high-end projects, from more high-end products. We were able to gamify things and bring in elements that would indicate that someone is learning. There is a learning curve. The engagement is happening. So there would be things like a leaderboard embedded in the system that would, almost instantly tell you the performance of the test taker. On the qualitative side, of course, so that's on the quantitative side for customer engagements. And of course, once on the qualitative side, once we would sort of turn over the quantum of work and content that we have created to the client, they would of course run their own internal appraisals and performance meetings, where they would understand whether someone has gone through the program. This is what they were at before the program, and after the program, this is where they are. So that is something that they would run internally, and we would see a market sort of change and increase in terms of the learning curve. Again, depending on the format that was used to drive that program. And many a times that data would be used to tweak what we had done to sort of, tweak it for engagement, for increase in engagement.
Gotcha.
On the internal front, as far as we're concerned, I think what we would really work on is what we would really consider great criteria was comments and discussions started based on the content that we publish from time to time. And some of the things that you would do on social, for instance, either an infographic or an industry, piece of data. How many? So, for instance, we would look at, let's say, on Instagram, we would look at the number of shares or saves rather. Even if, let's say, the comments were few or the discussions were few, the save criteria is something we looked at. So depending on what the content was and what the engagement or what the engagement type was rather, we would say, okay, this is what is doing well. This has been, relatively higher for this sort of content. So let's do more of infographics. Let's do more of how-to content. This blog is generating a lot of discussions and comments. Someone is saying that, okay, we did let's say a listicle on how AI could help e-learning. And that space is again maturing and evolving every day. So someone from that space has written to us and said, hey, what do you think about this? So it would start there. And of course, those discussions would then move offline at some point, and go into a space where we're talking about potential engagements at times. So it would have an online component, but it also would have an offline component. So that would be another criteria or another KPI that we would look at and track, which would eventually again flow into, let's say, the funnel, the sales and marketing funnel, as it were, or the BD engine, as it were. So those are some of the things that that we would look at.
What is the process of keeping the content fresh? Say, for example, how do you make, say, from your KPIs, you derive that this particular content piece is not that engaging. How do you go about improving that? Few tips related to that.
Right. See, I think I would borrow, and I've been saying this also to everyone I meet, the concept of design thinking is, I don't think it only is something that you can apply to UI UX design. I feel the concept of design thinking, I might be, it might be a crazy, weird, creative way of looking at it, but so be it. I love the fact that when you design UI UX, platforms and work and projects, you keep the customer pain point at the center, right? And in fact, most of the firms, most of the startups, most of the companies doing really well today, and who will continue to do well, are guys who keep the customer at the center and their problems at the center. That's something I borrowed. We borrowed from the UI UX world and apply it to what we do. And that's essentially what helps us with even content strategy discussions. We look at what are the problems that the industry is facing, what are the problems that a learner is facing, and so not just from an industry or an organization point of view, but also from an individual point of view. Because it's very democratic now. I mean, you and I want to learn something that we have never ever believed that we would. Sometimes we don't even know what we want, but we surf and we browse, and then this looks interesting. We read an article there. I mean, now lots of stuff going around NFTs. Now, an artist or a musician or someone in the creative space can actually get in on that. But how do you do that? How do you monetize something that you've created? Especially if it's an original, piece of content. Now that's something you and I can learn today. The individual has become very, very important, and the individual has a lot of information to give you.
Sure.
If you just ask, how can I help, right? If you just ask, tell me what's bugging you, tell me what's bothering you, what are your problems? So I think, internally, we of course keep having these discussions. Some of them will come through from customer engagements, right? It will be so apparent because it'll, just stare at you while you're doing a project. And then you'll start having larger discussions, macro level discussions about, really, this is something that should be considered. For instance, I'll give you an example. While we were doing a project for a client, we realized that because of the scale of the engagement, it was a multi-vendor, multi-team, multi-location, multi-everything project. It was a mess to begin with. So the actual first step was, like I said, investigation. The very first step was just understanding what the teams have to do. Because if there's no congruence, if team A doesn't know what team B is doing, or if team B is not talking to another team, it's going to crumble and fall. And that's essentially was one of the initial problems that we had to solve. So we asked the questions, what's wrong with this structure? And we realized that it all boiled down to the absence of one singular training manual that caters to all stakeholders, right? And that was missing. So we created that. We offered to create that for our client, they were happy to allow us to do it. We did it purely pro bono. It was something that we did because we felt that it could really enhance the efficiency of the project and just reduce the stress levels of the team, because that was, again, playing its own part in creating in sort of further complicating things. So we created a training manual that cut across all teams. Now, that's part of content strategy, right? When you're doing a piece of work and then you realize that, okay, hey, this is a problem, you create it. Now, it may not have been, something that made you laugh or, say, yeah, I get that. But it solved problems. It solved a problem. So, of course, internal discussions were part of it, but we also had discussions and conversations with people who were in this space, not just in India, but also overseas, and found out what's happening there. What are the trends? Where's the market looking? Of course, some of it also was driven by research. There's a lot of information and insight that comes from secondary research. HubSpot was able to sort of help there as well for a time. And we sort of put it all together and we just say, okay, this is the content bank we have. Now, what's the best way to sort of put this out, right? And to make it relatable, because again, you're coming up against attention spans and other challenges. Again, we wanted to make things relatable, human, and of course build a community around our problems, and then bring people together to solve, to help solve these problems and derive, user-generated content through and understand what people are saying and what people are suggesting as well.
That's really interesting, because a lot of marketers actually make this mistake, and sometimes the problem is so simple. Like when you talk to the people using that particular piece of content, and just check with them instead of just barely looking into the say analytics matrix or the heat maps, just checking dude, the time spent is so low, and the content
Absolutely.
is remote. So
Absolutely.
just talking to people just opens your eyes so much, that you can actually diagnose deep down and solve that problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One point I forgot to mention was one very important group of people that we had conversations with were learning and development executives uh, in the training space, in educational firms, in edtech firms. Pretty much like what you're doing here, right? What are we doing here? You reached out to me, we're talking, you're understanding what I do, I'm understanding what you do, I'm talking about my problems in the space and possible solutions. So, like I said, it's so easy to do that today, provided you're open to that, and that collaboration and that exchange. It's so easy to just reach out to someone and say, hey, can I just talk to you and understand what your top 3 problems are, right? What are you facing what are the problems you're facing in terms of engagement, in terms of content, in terms of systems, in terms of tech? And let's just talk about that. It can be an open-ended discussion. It doesn't have to be, that it doesn't have to have an incentive or anything to it. Because I think that's something that a lot of us also missed in 2020 and also in 2021, right? So I think that came back in a different avatar, as it were. But yeah, what you will learn from a human cannot be replicated, through a face-to-face. Cannot be replicated if it's done through a face-to-face, etc. You can always, automate and build out for some of the more menial, repetitive tasks. But what you will learn from a human is irreplaceable. So that's something that we sort of impressed a lot of importance on.
Gotcha. The next question is a bit out of context here, but have you used AI for content generation? And what was your experience? If you have,
I have actually. I have. So HubSpot has a few. Then I think we used some tools from this company called CoSchedule. Okay. So I would say, and there's a bunch of other things that are also there. I think
long form content, or just because I know, like in my experience, AI produces good content piece if you need a small paragraph or bit of intro, your this thing, ad copies, etc.
Right.
But I never really had like a very pleasant experience creating a long form content using.
I would agree. I agree completely with you. I think the efficacy of AI-driven tools is limited at the moment, and I'm sure the creators of these tools are working on that to make it a lot more efficient and a lot more usable.
Yep.
And a lot more more error-free rather. But I agree with you in that, let's say, if I need a headline with, let's say, the right keywords for a specific topic, I found that if it's just, that specific task, it is small relative to, let's say, a 300-worder or a 500-worder or a 700-worder blog. It does okay on that front, also because of the sheer number of possibilities it throws up. Yeah. So it sort of alleviates the headache of iterating on that headline. But again, like you said, in terms of generating error-free, cohesive content in the long form, I don't think the tools are there yet. I've used a few, but I think you will still need manual intervention at this stage. So I hope they evolve and become more mature and But then again, some things some things are meant to be the way they are. I just feel that you just because you have the tech for it, you can't, you need not solve every problem that exists out there with tech. Certain things are meant to be the way they are, right? When it comes to creating content, I'd like to say this: reading is something that I don't think people do as much or as often as, let's say, we used to do when we were back in school, for instance. We would, go to the school library and borrow a book, or go to a library and borrow a book. I mean, yeah, people are reading online, but I think what's happened is, I think the people who read a book from cover to cover, I think that group has shrunk, or in some way, because I find that vocabulary and tone and style, skills that you need to write well. I mean, it could be a letter that you write to, your parents or your siblings or your spouse, or a college, even a letter, if written well, can spur so much emotion and feeling. Right now, that's a skill you can take anywhere. You can write a book, you can write a blog, you can write one-line copy. But I think everyone who has seen the benefit of reading, would say that, I wish people read more. I wish guys who are in the content space, and I'm not saying, I'm not dissing anyone out there. I'm just saying that, I mean, I for one, if you look at my table right now, I've got these 2 books here that I've been meaning to read. But I've come to a point where I'll read a little bit of both, because given the time, I'm not able to actually finish one book from cover to cover. So I'm guilty of that, of that too. But I think that is something that will continue to be manually driven, because the human brain and emotions and stories and words, etc., right, finding the right word to express the right emotion. I don't know. I don't know if a robot can do that. But let's see. I may be wrong.
It's evolving. I'm sure, in the next few years, definitely, this problem again will be solved, and definitely, the outcome will be much more refined.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure these problems are going to be. I mean, I may not even be around there, but who knows where the world is headed, right?
Let's be positive about that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk. One of the most successful case studies. I know, the duration, the time when you started the agency hasn't been long, but still, any useful case study I would like to share with us.
Sure. I mean, without going into numbers, I would like to mention this one engagement we had. Actually, I would say there are 2, but I'll just quickly spend some time on both. The first one was actually, funnily, just part of a email campaign that we ran, and it's funny because when we started off, we were having conversations with our potential customers, and there was a company that was doing some work in the K-12 segment. They were developing some content for schools, and they had they had some interesting products. They had an interesting platform, but I think the conversation that we had with them was a little too early to have at that time. And a year later, we ran an email campaign, and somehow it sort of, I think I think the mail went to maybe, I think, 5,000 people in a staggered manner. And this was the one that the one that got away, right, in a manner of speaking. So I think we struck a chord with the recipient of the email, who turned out to be a senior executive, not only in the e-learning space but also in the company. And it was sort of just what they needed to hear, because it was very specifically keyword driven, and keywords very relevant to the e-learning space. Now, one of the big challenges that the e-learning industry faces today is dealing with dry content, dealing with very boring content. Because, I mean, if you take boring content and put it in a boring format, there's going to be zero engagement. You have to take boring content and make it non-boring. Now, how do you do that? One option is gamifying it. One option is the gamification part of it, angle. And that's essentially what we were, that's essentially what we were talking about. Yeah. And a year later, they were actually at a point where, they were in a place to sort of have this conversation with us. So, if you talk about it from a point of view of the moment a client is on your Excel call sheet till when the client actually signs your contract and engages with you, that's a bit of a, that's a win that is worth celebrating. And especially if it comes from, something as regular as a mailing activity, but very structured and using keywords that appeal to your audience, appeal to your customers, and matches their pain points as well. And we were able to then, work on a very interesting project that involved one of the larger players in the e-commerce space, one of the first movers actually in the space, which again was great for us because we were able to be exposed to, larger organizations, practices, processes, etc., etc. And we were honored to execute the project for them. And it was a fairly large project in terms of commercial value. So we were happy to do that. The second one, engagement I would like to talk about is something that, I mean, it was a dream client, honestly, if I were to say, something that one project we did for them, where a lead came through a conversation on WhatsApp, in a WhatsApp group rather, turned out to be a long-lasting, retainer relationship with this client, with this customer, and great working system. So they were also sort of, it was kind of one of those engagements where with the firm, when the firm grows, when your customers grow, you also grow. So I think they were very, very largely responsible for, our initial growth, given how young we were. So, and in terms of engagement, this was of course a scope that involved a lot of design work, and there was a lot of appreciation and engagement also from the client on the stuff that we did. So I think both these clients, both these customer engagements deserve a mention.
And any negative experience in your career so far in a lesson learned?
I wouldn't say negative, but I wouldn't use that word. But I think every experience is a learning experience. And the trick is, whether you're looking at it from a professional point of view or an individual personal point of view, I mean, the idea is always to reduce the number of bad experiences or negative experiences, if you want to call it that, because everything is a learning. It's all part of the learning curve. And this is advice that I would give myself over and over again, and other young businesses or young guys who want to start their own venture. Basically, don't be in a hurry to start an engagement without really understanding the true scope and the true sort of length, breadth, depth of the engagement. If you're a new company, if you're a new firm, what tends to happen is if business comes knocking, then you're very sort of quick to say, yes, let's do it, because you can get your cash flows moving. If you're bootstrapped, then it eases some of the tension, and the pressure on funds, etc. And you start moving into the green territory sooner. There's a chance. But it's very important to understand what it really entails, because what may be discussed today may not actually be part of a scope, especially when the engagement takes off in full swing. And I would add one more point to that, which is this: always have a period of time, initial period of time, allow all parties of the engagement to understand one another, to understand one another's working processes, before you, let's say, allow a longer term tenure to set in, so that after a short period of time, if there are, let's say, certain learnings, certain outcomes that you would like to go back and discuss, you have a chance to do that. But if you say, yes, let's do it, then let's get started, and there's a lot of enthusiasm because it's your first client, and after just starting off, or it's your first international client, then that initial enthusiasm can wear off quickly. And I speak from personal experience to answer your question. Yes, when we started, we were bootstrapped. We are still bootstrapped, and we had our own. So my partner and I had our own clients that we brought to the firm. So we were sort of well positioned, but this particular incident that I'm talking about involved an international client, an international marquee client, a huge player in the ERP segment, and it involved some thought leadership on social. So the work was right up our alley, which is probably why we were also very sort of enthusiastic and excited to do it. But what happened was, once we sort of, right off the bat, when we started executing it, we realized that, again, pretty much similar to some of the gaps we learned in our engagement in 2020, where we realized that internal teams, there's a lot of gap over there. We realized that, we said that, okay, we saw some gaps that were unaddressed when we came on board, despite having, let's say, earlier agencies being part of the engagement. So that's something that we brought up, and it was appreciated. But then when we sort of went in further and further along the journey, we realized that there were a lot more challenges that we really could not grapple with, which was more macro in nature. And we assumed that we could pull it off because we said, okay, we'll try and deploy some folks because there was a time difference, that was part of the challenges as well. Yeah. But that's something that we couldn't really get around because with every passing day there was a new challenge. So I guess it just got to a point
as well, right?
Yeah, it just piled up. That's exactly it. So we were just putting out fires from day one, and that actually continued for a good fortnight or so. So unfortunately, we had to pull the plug and exit during the probation period. We tried sort of discussing this with the customer and looking at ways in which it could be solved, but it sort of it came to a standstill. It came to an impasse. So we just decided that it would be best if both parties exit, and we were allowed to sort of exit the engagement. So that was one. Yeah, that was a learning that it's a lifelong thing, right? So it's something that I would even suggest to anybody today.
That's very nice. That's very nice. I mean, you understand your capabilities, your team's capabilities,
yeah,
right, better than anyone else. Everyone knows their organization, and
yeah.
So being selective in whatever you can promise and deliver, right? That's
absolutely. Yeah.
Makes sense. But I think I've taken too much of your time. So let's.
Oh, not at all. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I rambled on. Trust me, I'm not one of those guys who loves the sound of his own voice. So I'm sorry if we're sort of we overshot because I rambled on earlier on. So yeah, just over to you. And
I think it's fine. Let's. I wanted to do a quick rapid fire as well. It's just one word answers. We can do that. I think that will make it a little bit more interesting, right?
And okay, sure. What's this about?
It's about you. Nothing related to you.
Okay, go for it.
Right. One word that describes you the best. Quick.
Uber creative.
I was suggesting thoughtful. What motivates and gives you the most kick?
Ideas.
What scares you the most? Not able to solve.
Not having enough in the bank to pay salaries for my people.
At what times in your life were you the happiest and why?
I think two times, right? One is when I was able to realize a dream, whatever the dream was, and that's pretty generic to anybody. But I think hearing good things about the work we've done, not just me, but also my team, and getting words of appreciation from our customers. It's so great. It validates what we're doing. It validates what we stand for, and to hear somebody appreciate that is great. I mean, nothing motivates more than that.
Absolutely. Your next big goal in life could be anything, personal, career-wise.
Build something that my son can take on when he's of age and can grow in the education space.
Oh, nice. Thank you, Varun. Thank you so much for your time and all the valuable lessons and your life experiences that you have shared. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Harshit. I had a ball. Folks should do this more often.
Yeah.
And yeah, I look forward to doing many more with these of these things, of these meetups and discussions with you. Wish you the very best. Wish you the very best. Wish you the very best. And I'm sure we'll connect online and offline and talk more. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Thanks, Harshit.